He has spoken on the topics faith, family and freedom in Cuba, Belgium, Brazil, Congo, UK and all over the USA to crowds from 14 to 40,000. International leadership speaker, trainer and coach. Author of Learn to Raw Leadership, Attitude Hack, Live a More Excellent Life, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. 2021 President's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Founding partner of the John Maxwell team. Toastmaster International Speech Competition semi-finalist. Founder of Tell It Like It Is TV, ThatGuyRocks.com and ThatGuySpeaks.com. Creator of Story Power TV, Transforming Grace TV, and Leading Leaders Podcast. Producer of 4 TV programs and podcasts for Liftable TV and World Trumpet Television as well as multiple social media channels. Please help me welcome J. Lauren Norris.
You ever met that communicator, that leader, that pastor, that teacher, that professor, that every story they tell, it's like, I, me, my story, and they got nothing else to say. It's not that the story shouldn't include your experience, but ultimately, the best communicators, they may tell you the experience they've had, but the story's not really about them. That's what I'm going to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. Stay tuned.
Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.
I'm J. Lauren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and I just want you to know that the number of storytellers, communicators, pastors, teachers, leaders, counselors that I've seen put a mic in their hand and stand on a stage and spend the majority of the time talking about themselves is frankly quite mind-boggling. Now, I know that if you've paid any attention to me for any period of time, you know that for the last, dozen years or so, I've told people, tell your personal story. Tell your own story. Don't use somebody else's anecdotes. Don't use stories from a book. If you focus there, you damage your credibility. Well, so you got to tell your story. As Dale Carnegie says, you got to earn the right to tell it. You got to tell it with enthusiasm, and you got to be eager to tell it. If those 3 things are true of the story that you're about to tell, then that's awesome. Now, how do you earn the right to tell it? Well, you got to live through it, be a first-hand eyewitness, or research it thoroughly. Those are the 3 ways you earn the right to tell a story. Picking it up and reading it in somebody else's book, it doesn't really qualify. But what does qualify is to say, I've been where you've been, and this is what I learned. Now, what are the 6 essential elements of the story that you tell that make it a powerful communication form for genuine transformation? You might want to write these down. Otherwise, you're going to have to go get the free download. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you want to really improve the quality of your stories, you should spend some time on these 6 essentials. So here's how your story is about your audience and not about you. Your story is about your audience and not about you. Here's how. Number 1, your story matches your demographics. Your story matches your demographics. Now, it might be that when you define your ideal niche, that group of people is so finitely defined. You know their age, you know their income, you know their education level, you know what part of the country they live in, you know what kind of past experiences they've had. And so you've got that pretty much nailed down, which means the stories that you choose to tell already resonate with that audience, with that demographic. But the truth is, there are going to be moments, especially if you're in a world as a teacher, as a leadership or communications expert outside a specific niche. Let me give you an example. If you're a doctor and you focus on a vertical thing like a type 2 diabetes, well, your audience may have the one thing in common, that they are type 2 diabetic. But they may also be of varying ages, varying educational backgrounds, varying cultural differences. There are as many Caucasians, as Hispanics, as Blacks, in America who suffer with type 2 diabetes. Would you agree with that statement? Or would you say that one of those cultures has more than the other? Well, if you don't know the answer to that question, you can't make blanket statements that you expect to fit all of them, number one. Number two, each of those different just simple racial breakdowns or cultural breakdowns have completely different cultural experiences. Their diet is different. Their habits are different. The neighborhoods they hang out in are different. Their lifestyles are different. And that's not judgment, that's observing reality. And when you observe that kind of reality and you think to yourself, if I'm a physician and I talk about type 2 diabetes, and I presume that every audience I get in front of has exactly the same issues, I haven't done my homework. Now, we could take the same thing and say, I'm a mechanic, I only work on Porsche. Okay, Porsche Cayenne or the 911 Targa. Which Porsche are you talking about? Are all Porsches created the same? No. Are they all the same from different eras? No. A while back, I had a chance to buy a Porsche 914. It was very reasonably priced. I thought that would be a really cool car to cruise around in. Just so happens, though, I have a friend that for 20-something years was a specialist technician on Porsche Automotive. That's all he worked on. And I called him and I said, hey, what do you think of this car? And Bernard said, don't do it. Go spend that money on a stranger before you buy that car. Go stand at the lake and throw that money in the water before you buy that car. Because that's only the initial investment, and you will spend so much more on that car before you give up on it and get rid of it. I didn't buy that car. Why? Well, because the specialist understood something about that car. Now, is Porsche a good brand? Well, they've been around for a long time. They sell a lot of cars. People that own them absolutely love them. They spend a lot of money on them. That's pretty good evidence that Porsche makes a great car. But that one particular one was not such a great car. Not that year, not that model. Don't do it. Well, what does that mean? It means that that particular one, that audience of owners, that era of the 914, not a good deal. Not a good idea at all. But see, you got to know your audience well enough to know that specificity. When you take the stage and you say, well, I'm just going to talk about cars, that's a very broad subject. I'm going to narrow it down to race cars. I'm going to narrow it down to Porsche Automotive. I'm going to narrow it down to an era of time. I'm going to narrow it down to a specific model. And then you realize, oh, so you're talking about the Shelby GT from 1967, the 500, right? Or you're talking about the 429 Cobra Jet from right after that, because those are different. Yeah, they're both Mustangs, they're both Fords, but that's about all their commonality. When you talk about chefs, my wife and I love to watch Next Level Chef. And the idea that there are those chefs who are chefs on social media, meaning they may not have a whole lot of experience cooking. They're not the chemists kind of chef. They're the ones that know how to get in front of a camera and perform well and just happen to be good cooks as well. And then you got the home chef, which means basically they're cooking for their family most of the time, but they really love cooking, and so they've done some homework and some research. Then you've got the professional chefs, the ones that might be making 5, 6, 7 figures as a chef. And when you compete them against each other, well, that's a whole different thing. But see, now we're talking again, not just about the category of chef, but we're talking about the breakdown of the demographics. Their psychology, their education, their experiences are totally different. Could you talk about a mustard glaze to all of them? You could. But I will never forget the statement when Chef Ramsay had asked the entire crowd, and at this time it was a very full crowd, they hadn't started eliminating people yet, to make a particular saute with this particular type of a mushroom. And he used a phrase, I can't repeat it because I didn't understand the word when he said it. But he said there are probably 1 in 10 professional experienced chefs that know how to do this, whatever it was that he said. And when he said it, everyone in the room looked at each other like, what? Including the other 2 judges. And Chef Ramsay threw his hands in the air and started to walk off like, I can't believe I'm alone among these people. Now, if he walked out into that room and said, I want you to do this, this, and this, and he presumed as the communicator, that everybody already understood that, he would be a failed communicator. See, when your story doesn't match the demographics of the people in the audience, when you haven't asked the question, what is their age? What is their race? What is their income level? What is their education level? What are their experiences? Then you may tell a story that's perfectly relevant, but they don't get it. You've got to understand who's in your audience before you start that. Your story's got to include, this is number 2, by the way, your story's got to include the people in the audience. If you take the platform, and I don't care if it's a virtual meeting or it's in front of 10,000 people or 10 people, if you begin to tell your story, the one you've lived through, the one you've earned the right to tell, that you're eager to tell, you tell with enthusiasm, when you begin to tell that story and you realize that aside from you being in that story and you being on the platform in front of everybody, no other persons in that story resemble the persons in your audience. They don't look like them. They don't have the same background. They're not of the same age range. They don't match the demographics. Now you have a second level problem, and that is you're telling a story the audience absolutely cannot relate to. You've got to choose the story. That's why when we talk about story power, we talk about 4 phases. The number 1 phase is story selection. You may have billions of moments in your life that are learning moments. I tell my clients you should have 100 different stories, not because you're making 100 different points, but you should be able to look at each point in your journey, your customer journey. You should be able to look at each point in your customer journey, each of the pillars you're going to teach, each of the lessons you want to bring that are going to transform their lives. You should be able to look at those and go, I'm going to change out the story for that point, because when I look in the audience, when I notice the demographics of the group that I'm going to speak to, there are certain preconceived notions, certain ideologies that they hold that story doesn't exhibit or demonstrate. I speak in a lot of circles where there are people of faith. I speak in a lot of circles where there are people of faith who have one particular denominational bent versus another. Well, I grew up in this one. I understand it well. I understand what kind of things offend them or cause them curiosity or cause them to throw up their barriers. I also understand this group and the trigger words that allow them to say, yeah, we resonate, we're on the same page. As a communicator, if I intentionally included words that one group is offended by and another group is excited by, I'm dividing my audience. Now, there is a time and a place to do that that's a bit more of an advanced level. It's called weeding out your customer. It's how you dive into a niche. Out of a large group of people who say, I'm type 2 diabetic, how do you get down to the culture that's closest to the people you serve and the successes you've seen? There's a reason for weeding out an audience that might say, oh, I want your help, but they can't afford it. I want your help, but they're not really ready to do the work. I want your help, but they want to buy results, not take action. Those are totally different. There's a reason that you might use specific verbiage to disinclude people who are sitting in the audience right now, so that as they listen to you, they go, yeah, that's not for me. See, that's the truth of a story. It's either for you or it's not. And as an audience member, as a listener, as a participant, that's your decision. As a communicator, you should be very intentional about that. The intent of your communication should be that it includes the people in your audience. As you tell the story, people in the audience see themselves in their story. Now, here's the truth. There may be 3 or 4 characters in the story. There's mom and there's dad and there's the teenage son and there's the 5-year-old daughter. But then there's also the neighbor and the observer who was driving down the road and slamming on the brakes when the ball bounced in the street. And all of a sudden, with just what I said right now, you can picture a scene in your head. You see that whole moment. And I didn't even tell you a story. I just laid out who the characters were and one moment of action, the ball bouncing in the street. And here's what happens psychologically. You ask yourself, where am I in this picture? You don't do it on purpose. You're not trying to find yourself in that picture. It's just the human subconscious natural reaction. And you think, am I the 5-year-old? Do I remember the ball bouncing in the street and I nearly got hit by the car? Do I remember my teenage brother who threw the ball? Do I remember my parents sitting on the porch, completely unaware that there was a car coming and my ball was in the street? Was I the driver in the car slamming on my brakes, wondering why are these parents not paying any attention to this teenage boy who's trying to get his little sister killed? And all of a sudden, there's a whole swirl of dynamics of psychology that's embedded in that story. And if the people in the audience don't see themselves in your story, they will abandon your story because they feel like your story has abandoned them. There's a whole teaching on that from the Story Power series of the Leading Leaders podcast. I challenge you to go back, Spotify, whatever other way you want to watch it, YouTube. You can actually go to the YouTube podcast under the Leading Leaders podcast and search Story Power, and you'll find the whole series. There's a complete in-depth teaching on that one thing, on how your story has to include the audience in front of you. But let me go on to the next one. Your story, this is number 3, your story builds people up. Meaning, it doesn't just make them feel bad for throwing the ball in the street. It doesn't just make them feel bad for having type 2 diabetes. It doesn't just say to them, you're in a bad spot. Because if you don't say you're in a bad spot, if you don't match the need, that's actually number 4. If you don't match the need, match the pain, match the circumstance that they find themselves in, if your story doesn't sound familiar enough to them to go, yeah, I know what that feels like, then you haven't matched the need with the pain. That's number 4. But to go back to number 3, you've got to intentionally know where you're taking them. You're building them up. You're casting a vision. You're encouraging them. You're future casting for them. See, this 3 and 4, they're like links in a chain, or like a belt on a pulley. One doesn't work without the other. If you can't express to your audience how you know the pain they have, how you've experienced what they're experiencing, then they don't care what you have to say. I mean, again, you may have a phenomenal life story, bit in half by a shark, been to the top of Mount Everest, visited the moon, won an Olympic race. Yay! But unless there were lessons learned in that journey that I can take and learn in my life, why do I care to hear your story? At that moment, the story is all about you. Okay, great story. Maybe it's a great storytelling. Maybe you're even a great communicator at getting your point across in the story that you're telling. But if that story doesn't identify my pain, then your story is nothing more than entertaining. If it does identify my pain, and I can look at it and go, I know exactly what that feels like. It sucks. I don't want to be like that anymore. I don't want to be like I am right now anymore. I want to be better. I want to be smarter. I want to be faster. I want to be more successful. I want to get over the pain. I want to find the pleasure. If your story helps people identify themselves in that, then they're going back to number 3 and they're asking, great, now that I see myself in your story, I feel just like you felt when that happened to you, but I'm still living in it. How do I get out of it? Now they want you to go back to number 3 and give them hope, encourage them, future cast for them. This is where you begin to make promises that if you'll follow the instructions that I'm giving you, your life is going to get better. The problem is going to go away. The pain will be less. The pleasure will be greater. The opportunities will be more. When your story illustrates that and instructs that, you can do all that in the course of the story. You don't have to tell a story, make a point, give a lesson. Tell a story, make a point, give a lesson. A lot of people do that. There's nothing wrong with it. But let's go one step further. What if the crafting, this is number 2 in the story power process, select the right story, craft it well. What if the crafting of the story told the story in such a way that it was a metaphor or an allegory, it was a lesson learned that they could look at, and they see the process that you went through as an outside observer, and they realize, you don't have to tell me what I need to do. I heard what you said. It resonated deeply with me because I know that I feel right now like you felt when that happened, and I see what you did there. I'm gonna do that because that was clever. I like that. I like the way you did that. I like the results you got. And see, when all of those things begin to work together like a pulley and belt system, then the need pushes the hope, and the hope pulls the need and says that we can get to a better place from here. And that future casting begins to say, this is what life will look like when you begin to take these instructions to heart. And I don't have to tell you to take these instructions to heart. I just have to paint a picture of what that success will look like, and then you desire it for yourself. And here's something you need to know about the psychology of teaching and learning. If I tell you what to do, there's resistance. If I encourage you to do something, there's less resistance. If I demonstrate what I've done, and you can pick up on that lesson yourself, it's your idea now. There's almost no resistance. Now, there'll still be some resistance for the idea of the change, because all change brings pain. You have to stop doing one thing and start doing another in order to improve the quality of your life. I don't care what that is. Diet, exercise, study, work habits, jobs, friends, circle of influence. You've got to stop doing one thing in order to do another, because we can't do it all. None of us can. If you understand that, then laying that hope out there in front of them to go, well, you could have that. In order to have that, here's what I did. I'm not telling you have to do that, but if you like that, if you want to go there, then here's how I got there. And all of a sudden people take ownership of that, and they're like, okay, I think I could pay the price for that. I think I'm willing to invest financially, emotionally, physically, relationally in that, because that really is where I want to be. I want to go there. Now all of a sudden it's their idea, and they want to get there. Number 5. The story you're telling reveals that hero's journey, and you don't always have to be the hero. In fact, oftentimes it's better when you're not the hero, especially when you get to that future casting and you're saying, when you follow the instructions that I'm giving you, even the ones that are embedded in the story, they don't sound like, you need to do this, stop eating sugar. Yeah, we all know we need to stop eating sugar. But how much better is it when you see that person who's 65 years old with an 8-pack? And they're like, holy cow, you look awesome. How did that happen? Well, I used to be 250 pounds. Right, you're not now. How did that happen? I stopped eating sugar. I don't have to say to you, you should stop eating sugar. You look at it and go, oh, that's what I want. I want that fit body like that. I want to be 65 years old and look like I just ran a marathon. I want to be in that kind of condition. I want to have my full cognition. I want to have all my teeth. Well, when do you stop eating sugar? Yesterday? 20 years ago? Because when I do, the results begin to change like right away. But I don't have to tell you to do that. I just have to show you what the reward is. And this intrinsic motivation comes up in you to go, well, that's what I want. Tell me how you got it. Oh, well, I just stopped eating sugar. That's the result I want. And now I know what I need to do. And I'm going to move forward with that. And see, this hero's journey, when it's at the end of your story, it's best when it describes someone else that you've helped. I have a client who in January of this year spoke in front of the Supreme Court on probably one of the most controversial, blood-boiling topics you can possibly imagine. And we worked tirelessly, hours, probably a dozen hours, on a 3-minute presentation. We adjusted words by their meaning. Do we add the ing or do we not? Is it present tense or is it past tense? Just how deep do we go with that notion to carry the weight of this kind of speech? You got 3 minutes. 3 minutes to change the world. How intensely do we need to communicate this? And the last 3 sentences of that pointed to a hope that people went, wow, that's what I want to see in my life. That's what I want to see in this world we live in. That's what I want to see happen. How do we do it? Well, go back to the top of the speech and read again, and you're going to see all the problem outlined and the solutions that came and how the solution came about and the result that it's going to have. And in the closing sentences, you have, this is how that solution has changed lives already. People, that's what I want. That's the hero's journey. And it wasn't just the journey of the person telling the story. While it was also their journey, there are hundreds of others now that they can point to and go, They followed the same path. They took the same instruction. They did it themselves. They walked through this process, and now they have this same victory. And that's the story of the hero's journey that reveals your social proof. That you identified the pain, you found a solution, and you walked through it, and it worked. Here's the last one. Your story must include proof that the promise you made happened. I stopped eating sugar. I'm still alive at 75, 85, 95. I'm still in good shape. I'm still fully cognizant. I'm still fully aware because I stopped eating sugar when I was 50. I got 40 years of evidence. Not just my life, but all these other people. I stopped doing this thing or going to that place or hanging out with these. I stopped letting toxic people speak into my life. I stopped letting narcissists control my calendar. I stopped living under the demands of other people and the tyranny of the urgent, and I chose my own priorities. I chose my own core values. I began to make decisions based on what was the best outcome for the people I care about. Me included in that list. And my life has been different since then. But see, it's not just about my life. It's about all these other people who have mimicked exactly the same thing. I model what I teach. I don't just say it, I do it. And then other people go, hey, that worked pretty well for you. How could I do the same thing? And then we get together. And in a community, we continue to do the same thing together. And together we bring about a lot of change. And as we bring about a lot of change, the promises that I made to myself are the promises that I'm making to you. And the promises that I'm making to you, they will be proven true, just like they were for so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. Their hero journey looked like this. And that's how you close out a speech, by pointing to the future, keeping the belt on the pulley, that yes, there's pain, but there's another promise. And there's pain and there's another promise. And there's pain and there's another promise. And that pain and that promise revolve around encouragement and hope and future casting. And if you'll stick with it, the results are coming. It's not if, it's when. How long do you have to hold on? How long will you fight to see the change come about in your life? How long before those promised results begin to appear? Well, that's all about how much effort you put into it. How hard are you willing to try? What price are you willing to pay? And if you'll make that investment in yourself, in your relationships, in your future will be better. The future looks bright if you're looking in the right direction. There are those main 6 essentials. There's a whole lot more to storytelling. Selecting the right story, crafting that story well, making sure that story connects with the audience in front of you, and then knowing where you want to lead the narrative in the first place. Why are you talking? Where are they going? That future casting, that hoping, that's all in the narrative. What is the narrative that you want to deliver to them? Well, now it goes back to the story selection. You've got to select the right story to lead that narrative. You've got to craft that story well to lead that narrative. You've got to connect with them if you want the narrative that you're driving to be impactful. And that's a cycle as well. Select the right story, craft the right story, connect with the audience deeply, and lead the narrative in their lives. How do you do that? You select the right story. Yeah. It's a process. If you'd like some help with that process, I'd love to help you. This conversation, this podcast, is about leadership. Leadership rises and falls on communication. If you're not a good communicator, you won't be a good leader. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I'm J. Lauren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.
Lauren is a master teacher on storytelling, and I learned so much. I'm really going to have to sit down and go back through everything, and I think I might have to have some more coffees with Lauren, but it was totally worth my time, and I really highly recommend it if you're looking to grow your ministry, grow your business, grow your career. Lauren will serve you well.